Day is 6. Now moving on to our third paragraph of our diary entry in week 3. Remembering it's from Florian's perspective, and it's about when Joanna tried to remove the shrapnel from the arm. So starting off with a do now, look at the sentences on the board and you'll see that the commas are in the incorrect position. I want you to try and find out what is wrong with the commas and put them in the correct position, please. So you might want to pause the presentation for 30 seconds to try and do the do now. So hopefully you have an opportunity to do that. I've written the corrections on the board here below the do now. So rather than at 4 o'clock, I'll comma go home. It obviously makes more sense with the correct pause in the sentence should be at 4 o'clock, comma, I'll go home. In the second example, rather than with utmost, comma, caution, he removed the lid, it should be with utmost caution, comma, he removed the lid. Because he's in two separate clauses there. With utmost caution is the front of the verb, and then comma, he removed the lid. And the third example, although, comma, it was raining, she still walked to school. That doesn't make sense. Although it was raining, she still walked to school. No, it should be, although it was raining, comma, she still walked to school. And this is a really common mistake we see because although people just think that you put a comma straight after it, as you would do sometimes in a sentence, but although it was raining is the front of the adverbial phrase this time, so the comma needs to follow it rather than just although. So please be aware of these common mistakes in your writing today. So we're going to be working on fronted adverbials today. So first of all, what are fronted adverbials? And we've covered this many times this year. So as you can see from the screen, this is just a recap. So an adverbial is a word or phrase that's been used like an adverb to add extra detail or further information to a verb. And fronted adverbials are fronted because they have been moved to the front of the sentence before the verb. And that's the important thing, maybe identifying the verb first and making sure the adverb is before the verb. Remember, verbs are doing words. So again, this should be really familiar to us now. What are the different categories of fronted adverbials? Category spent about wrong there, but what are the different categories nonetheless? So I've got 3 here. I remember feelings means the same thing as manner in this example. So you've got fronted adverbials of time, fronted adverbials of location, and fronted adverbials of manner or feelings, depending on which way you call it. So examples of time adverbials here, you've got today, yesterday, on Monday, after a short while, in the blink of an eye, later, eventually, recently, early in the morning, punctually, in June, and after dusk. And you'll see that the commas always need to follow the fronted adverbial phrase. So making sure that it's not just after, it's after a short while, if that's the phrase, or not just after early in the morning, if it's a phrase there. So you might want to write some of these ideas down to use in your writing today. We've got fronted adverbials of location or place. So we've got over the mountain, comma, in the distance, on the shore, outside the house, down the stairs, underneath the bridge, aboard the boat, around the corner, adjacent to the shop, far away. And all these examples here, remember, these may not always apply to our writing today. So it may be in the corner of the barn, or out of the corner of my eye, or outside the barn door, or sitting on a hay bale, or something like that, okay? Or near the other refugees, maybe more appropriate to include today. And we've got fronted adverbials of feelings as well, and these are really, really relevant. So maybe anxiously, in a flash, suddenly, nervously, curiously, joyfully, unfortunately, frantically, that means with a lot of energy, enthusiastically, wildly, courageously, or as fast as he could. And just making sure you really do remember the comma after the fronted adverbial phrase. So, quick taught task now, but obviously we would do that as a taught task in a lesson, but I think it's a good idea for you to practice this before we move on to our independent tasks, not least because these are relevant to what you are writing about today. So I want you to up-level the sentences below using fronted adverbials. So you might want to pause this. I give yourself a minute this time to pause this video, try and choose a fronted adverbial before these sentences, and you might want to flip back to the previous fronted adverbials in the previous slide to see which ones you can include. So I'll just read them out while you're thinking about what fronted adverbial will go in front of it. So first one, I grabbed her hand to stop her from taking them, or I saw her hands moving towards my identity papers, or she examined my wounded side. Which fronted adverbials make sense? And remember, they're usually words which end with ly, and they could be manner, time, or place in front of three sentences here. So hopefully you had an opportunity to pause the video and do that there. I thought of 3, however, these are not the only ones which make sense. And it would be great if you could maybe include some of the ones which you thought of, as long as they make sense in your writing today. So I thought of quickly, comma, I grabbed her hand to stop her from taking them. Obviously, quickly makes sense because you're not going to want to do it suddenly, otherwise she would have taken them. You're not going to want to do it slowly, sorry, because otherwise she would take them. You could do instead maybe suddenly or frantically or urgently. I grabbed her hand to stop her from taking them. Second example, I thought of out of the corner of my eye, I saw her hands moving towards my identity papers. You might do suddenly, I saw her hands moving towards my identity papers, or on my left or on my right, I saw her hands moving towards my identity papers, or maybe luckily, comma, I saw her hands moving towards my identity papers. And then finally, I've put carefully, comma, she examined my wounded side. I thought carefully made sense here because obviously she's going to want to do it with care because otherwise it will hurt it. You might want to do instead gently or with care or with great care, comma, she examined my wounded side. So you might want to pause this video here and maybe magpie some of these sentences to use in your writing today to give you some ideas. So what are we going to be writing about today? We are going to be using interesting adverbials to open sentences. So these are interesting adverbials like the frontal adverbials we've mentioned. And we are going to be writing about how Florian feels when Joanna sees the shrapnel in his side, because obviously she tends to it because she's the one with medical experience. And also write about when Joanna tries to take Florian's identity card. And I've got two images here to try and spur our imagination here. So on the hand here, you've got the shrapnel. And on the right of this, you've got the National Registration Identity Card, which is an actual image of one which was used during the war and which might have looked similar to Florian's one, which he was really careful about keeping, which he really wanted to keep it safe. We're not sure why at this point. So I thought it would be useful to remind ourselves of this part of the book. So I've screenshot here examples of the extract. So I'll read it out to you. And I just want you thinking, I'll read out the main bits anyway. I want you thinking, what information can I use from this to use in your writing? So shrapnel, about 2 days ago. You stopped the bleeding by applying pressure, but that pushed the fragments deeper, causing more pain. It's infected. You poured liquid on it at some point, and that was Joanna speaking, who was inspecting his wound. Vodka. Her voice resumed in my ear. There are a couple of pieces. I want to take them out. I don't have any anaesthetic. Do you have anything to drink? I asked. Yes, but I'll need the alcohol to clean the wound before I dress it. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I should do this now, before the infection becomes too advanced. Small boots appeared in front of my face. The Polish girl knelt in front of me with snow wrapped in a handkerchief. She swept my hair aside and pressed the cold compress to my forehead. Go away, I told her. Wait. The nurse looked at the Polish girl. Could you please go outside and find a large stick? The girl nodded and left. The nurse then sat down in front of me. I watched her mouth as she whispered, her name is Emilia. She's from southern Poland. Her father sent her away for safety, near Nemesdorf. Holy hell, I breathed. And on to the next page now, because this is the bit written about when she tried to take the identity papers. I know it's cold, but let's remove your coat entirely and have you lie on your stomach, I told him. As I pulled off a sleeve, his pale green identity card peeked out from his interior jacket pocket. Perfect. If he wouldn't tell me his name, I'd take a look for myself. I'm going to press the surrounding area of the wound to see how far the infection has spread. He didn't respond. Tell me when it hurts. I gently pressed around the perimeter of his wound with one hand, making notes of tender areas. With my other hand, I tried to wriggle the papers from his coat pocket. Stop! The ferocity of his command made me jump. Hand me my papers. What? You heard me. Now. He reached back and I placed the identity card in his hand. And the folded paper is also in the pocket, he said. I pulled out the cream sheet of paper, trying to get a look at it. I couldn't see through the fold. He snatched it and slid both under his chest. So hopefully that's given you a good idea of I remind you of the bit in the story when Joanna looked at the shrapnel and when she tried to steal his identity papers, because that's what we're going to be writing about today. You'll see at this point in the lesson, we'd obviously do a shared write using your ideas, which would obviously be fantastic. But unfortunately, I've had to write one without you, just obviously because we're not together. I've written the step success as I always do on the right-hand side. So you've got the steps here. In red, write about how Florian feels when Joanna sees the shrapnel. And after that, I've written in purple here, write about when Joanna tries to take Florian's identity card. So the first bit, how Florian feels when Joanna sees the shrapnel. I'll write what I've written first, then I'll give you some more ideas of what we might write. And while I'm reading that, I want you to think, what interesting adverbials have I used? Surprisingly, the young nurse seemed unfazed when she saw my wounded arm. So I should be wounded side. Had she seen much worse? Probably. Even so, I knew that it'd be removed quickly. She had the initiative to send the Polish girl for a stick to try to lessen the pain. So I've included the fringe verb surprisingly here, because he'll obviously be surprised. He thought that, because he said earlier, he thought all girls would be shocked or be surprised about the gruesome wound on his side rather than his arm, sorry. What else could I write instead? Maybe say, to my surprise or to my shock, the young nurse didn't look as horrified as I thought she would. Maybe she's seen a lot worse before. Then maybe say that she had the initiative to remove it quickly and had the idea to go and get a stick to try and lessen the pain. Or maybe you might say, you might say instead, gently, the young nurse examined my side and looked at the shrapnel. I was shocked to see how much there was. Frantically, she said we needed to act quickly to remove the shrapnel and to save my life, or something like that instead. So you might want to pause the video now and think about how Florian would feel when Joanna sees the shrapnel, bearing in mind she had less of a surprise reaction than he thought she would have. Second example here, I've written about about when Julian tried to take Florian's identity card. So I've written this in purple here, so you might want to follow along on the screen while I read this out. While we were waiting, something happened. Out of the corner of my eyes, I saw her hand try to wriggle my precious identity papers from my coat pocket. I was furious. Perhaps I was right to not trust her. Sheepishly, she returned them after I grabbed her hand, but the damage was already done. So I've got here two frontal variables. I've got while we were waiting, and I've also got out of the corner of my eye. I've also included a short sentence here, exclamation mark and ellipsis. But what else could I have written? So when Joanna tried to take Florian's identity card, she might say, while she was tending to my wound, comma, I saw her hand move towards my identity papers in my coat pocket. And then say, quickly, I moved my hand, I grabbed her hand and told her to give me them back. I knew I shouldn't have trusted her. Embarrassedly, she returned them to me, but not before she had a second look to try and see what was on them. Why is she so keen to see them? Or something like that, okay? So I want you to now try and pause the video and think, what else could you write about when Joanna tried to take Florian's identity card? What can you write here? For your independent task today, you can use this model to help you, but obviously I want you to change it because you can't, you've got to have your own individuality. Please use the independent task help sheet, which I'll attach to this upload on Seesaw. And remember, it should be about a page line alongside, because this is how long we push for in the lessons. Please make sure using interesting adverbials to open your sentences, and I cannot wait to see your work. Good luck, Year 6.